Hi, everybody. So, today's lecture is about modes. Okay? So, today we're going to cover an introduction to modes, what the modes are, and especially how to sing modes. I'm going to provide you with two solfege systems for our own use. You could use either one. I'll go ahead and explain a little bit about the context. I'll give you both ways. I'll talk about how we name modes and how we identify modes, and then I'll end by giving you some things to practice and to keep up on. So, what are modes? Modes are basically taking the major scale that we have, that we're used to, that we're comfortable with, the 7-note diatonic major scale, and shifting it to start on different pitches, but keeping that same pattern of whole steps and half steps intact. So the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we were to start the C major scale on D, for instance, but kept all the notes of C major, we'd get a very different sound. We've had a little bit of this hinted before. That Korngold example, the violin concerto from last quarter, was similar to that. It had a little bit of what implied a Lydian mode, and also since we've been working with chromaticism and raising pitches all year, we've kind of had these slip in, but now we're going to officially, formally talk about them. So modes are kind of a paradox for our purposes because in one regard they're very old, and in another regard they're very new. So historically, modes predate our system of major and minor. As we'll see in a second, major and minor are actually derived from modal systems, but originally, this is going back to the Greeks and then into the medieval music, and then even through the Renaissance and through the early Baroque, we still use modes. We had a set number of pitches that we had decided the interval ratios of. This is before equal temperament. So we decided the intervals. And modes were just a way of giving us different starting points and ending points in different areas. Over time, these expanded and then came back, and people had different conceptions of what modes were where and what they started on and how to tune these modes. But eventually we kind of codified. And composers saw that the modes could be reduced more simply into major and minor. So through the Renaissance, you see lots of wonderful modal music, and we'll be doing some of that in Rodgers and Ottman next time. But eventually, by the Baroque, and especially by people like Bach, we're getting into basically just major scales and minor scales. However, in the 20th century, we get a bit of a return to this. So modes come back in popular music and vernacular music because modes never really went away there. In a Western classical context, they did, but in folk music, they didn't. And in addition to that, you get some kind of pastiche pieces. So, for instance, Karl Orff's Carmina Burana is a piece that's very much built upon medievalism. You also get some modes coming into play with minimalist and postmodernist composers. And in addition, jazz is big into modes. So, modes are broad. If we take any set of pitches that we can consider a scale or a collection, we can think of them modally by starting in different places. Now, for symmetrical scales, like we had talked about a bit last quarter and we'll get into later in this quarter, like the whole tone and the octatonic scale, that's pointless because they're symmetrical. But basically, any scale that has a non-symmetrical pattern of half steps and whole steps can be made into modes. So for our purposes for this class, we are only going to talk about the major modes. And when I say major, I mean modes are derived from the major scale. That doesn't mean that all the modes sound major, though, as we'll see. So let's go ahead and talk about the major scale. So here's our major scale. It's in C, happy, comfortable C. So I put the solfege for you that we've been used to. And this is assuming the same pattern where if we start as C as our tonic, we have whole steps and half steps. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? We have a name for this. All the names for the diatonic modes are derived from Greek cities and tribes, but they've been kind of codified over the years. We call this Ionian mode. Okay? Now, we've already seen a mode before. Since the very first quarter of this sequence, way back in 4A, we had a mode of major. The Aeolian mode is if you were to take the major pitch set, so all the notes that comprise the C major scale, and start them on the 6th scale degree. That just gives you natural minor. So natural minor all along has been the Aeolian mode. Now, we modify minor in minor pieces to give us natural minor, to give us harmonic minor, to give us melodic minor. But in this case, we're not talking about tonality anymore. We're talking about modal music. So if a piece is written entirely in natural minor, you could say that the entire piece is in the Aeolian mode, and that it is not tonal, but is modal, okay? But that's only 1 in 6. Now, there's 7 pitches, 7 unique pitches in a scale. Okay, so I'm going to put the rest of those on the screen for you right now. We'll take a look at those in a second. Okay, lots to look at here, but let's go ahead and zoom back in on Ionian and Aeolian for a second. So in Ionian, I've given you the do solfege. Now, some systems, not our system, we use do-based minor, but some systems actually for this reason use la-based minor because you keep the same solfege as your relative major when you do Aeolian mode, as you can see. If we take that same principle of a fixed do, but a movable solfege, we get all these different options. So the second mode is the Dorian mode. So Dorian is assuming that you start on scale degree 2. Now, I put all of these in C, but C is not necessarily what all these modes are in normally. You could put them in any key, and they would still follow. If the scale starts on the first degree of a major scale, it's Ionian. If it's on the second degree of the major scale, it's Dorian, and so on. Okay, so the second mode is Dorian. Our third mode starts on Phrygian. Pardon me, that was phrased poorly. Our third mode is Phrygian and starts on our third scale degree. Our fourth mode is Lydian and starts on the fourth scale degree. Not to be confused with Mixolydian, back at the top again, where we start on our fifth scale degree. We have Aeolian, of course, and then Locrian. Locrian is the least common of all of these, and you almost never see it in repertoire unless you're talking about heavy metal, where it's actually made quite a bit of a comeback. But in any case, Locrian mode starts on 7. Now, again, all of our patterns of half steps and whole steps have transferred over. So for instance, if you look at the Phrygian mode, Phrygian starts with a half step between the first and second notes. Notice that? Between mi and fa. So that's what gets tricky about the modes, is that if you want to use the solfege this way, this is our first system of 2 I'll be giving you. If you want to use the modes this way, that means that you have to really be making sure that you're fixing the solfege to what it would be in its major equivalent, even though you're not going to be outlining our common major patterns anymore. Okay, so I don't have a keyboard set up quite yet. That's still a work in progress. But in any case, I have a melodica here. So what I'd like to do now is, bear with me. Let's go ahead and sing through all these modes. I'll give you the pitch, and we'll do it very slowly. Try to sing along with the solfege for each of these modes, and we will proceed in order from 1 to 7, and then we'll end back at 1 again. Okay, so let me just go ahead and slide this out here. So, C major. We know C major. Very happy, very comfortable. Okay, so we can just warm up. Let's warm up on a C major scale, okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so for all of these, let's go ahead and go up and then go down. Let's have each pitch be a half note in duration, okay? Just follow me if you don't understand, but not that hard to keep track of. In any case, follow me. Let's go on and move on to Dorian now. So, if this is do, we're going to be starting a C major scale now on D, which is re. Okay? So, I'm going to count off. I'm going to give you 4 beats of count off. And then every 2 beats, change notes and follow along with the solfege and try to get what that sounds like in your ear. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that was Dorian. Now, you may have noticed that that sounds shockingly familiar to perhaps a natural minor with one kind of crucial difference. If you notice that, great. Hold on to that. We'll come back to that in a second, okay? So let's do Phrygian now. So here's do again. Okay, now we're starting on Phrygian, which starts on mi. Ready? So same thing, 2 beats per note. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice the half step to get us back to 1. That is the most, the hallmark of Phrygian. That is what makes Phrygian particularly stand out from all the other commonly used modes. We'll get to Locrian. Locrian's weird. In any case, Number 4, let's move into Lydian. Lydian and mixed Lydian are going to sound more major. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on scale degree 4. So if here's Do again. Okay, there's Fa. So C major scale, but we're starting on Fa. Okay, same thing. 1, 2, 3. So we're a little more than halfway there. So at this point, you should be noticing these subtle but noticeable differences between minor and between major. Okay. So again, because we have the same notes in the same pattern of half steps and whole steps, all of these modes are going to sound somewhat familiar. This is both an asset for us and a detriment. We're so used to singing major and minor that our instinct is to fix them. Okay. In fact, there's a term for this historically, musica ficta. That's where we get B flats from, for instance. So historically, we would change that T in Lydian to a B flat if we were, say, doing this with it. Right? That's where accidentals come from. Okay. For our purposes, we want to avoid that as much as possible because these are a relatively easy thing to theoretically grasp. But what gets really tricky is that it's really easy to slip back in, especially for the ones that are really close to major and minor. So Dorian in particular and Lydian in particular are actually some of the harder ones, even though that they're kind of the easiest on our ears because they're so close and our brain's going to want to adjust it. So we'll get to what you should do to practice these at the end. But in any case, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so let's move on to 5, mixed Lydian. So here's Do again. Here's mixed Lydian. Here's Sol. Okay. So, C major scale, starting on G. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, mixed Lydian. Really common in folk and pop music, tremendously common, exceptionally common, okay? Especially that implied tato at the top, okay? Let's go ahead and do Aeolian. We'll just do it in quarter notes because you know Aeolian. Just A natural minor, ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? We got it. Remembering that it's Aeolian is the hardest part of that one. So, finally, Locrian. Now, I mentioned that Locrian is somewhat less common, and that's because the B that we start on in this particular context, notice that the difference between the first scale degree and the fifth scale degree is no longer a fifth anymore, it's a tritone. Okay? So, that's why this one's not really used that often. I'll try to find you some Locrian examples because it is kind of a really cool sound, but this one is so close to major that historically it kind of went away. Okay, so in any case, Locrian. Okay, so here's Do again. Here's T. Okay, so major scale. Let's do half notes again. Starting on scale degree 7 of major. Okay, make that 1 of Locrian. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I would say that that's the weirdest out of all of them. It does have that distinctive half step at the end, like Phrygian does, but that lack of a perfect fifth in the middle really kind of throws us out of balance. In any case, and I must apologize. Yeah, the melodic is a bit high in pitch, so it's a good time to practice your octave adjustments. Okay, so we have gotten through the entirety of the diatonic modes on one system. Okay, there's another system. You only need to know one. Okay, now I know that I have some really big solfegers in the class, so. Either system is based on solfege, okay? We haven't completely abandoned solfege quite yet. That's in a couple weeks, okay? So for right now, that's one way to think about it. Our Do is fixed, okay? And we just shift the major scale around. Now, That's if you want to keep everything relative to major. If you want to keep things relative to how half-step and whole-step patterns are changing relative to other keys, that's what this other system will do, okay? So we can treat each mode as a modification of major or minor. So for instance, I've talked about this a little bit already. Ionian is major, of course, and Aeolian is natural minor, of course, but we can think of those two as breaking off into our other modes. So for instance, Lydian is like major with a raised fourth, okay? It's like having a major scale with Phi. Mixolydian is like a major scale with a lowered seventh. It's like having a major scale with a Te at the top, okay? Minor, natural minor, of course. Dorian is like a natural minor scale, but with a raised sixth, but a still lowered seventh. So that would be, if we were in the key of D minor, it would be like a B natural. Phrygian is like a natural minor, but with a lowered two. Again, that half-step distinction. And then Locrian is like a minor with a lowered two and a lowered five. Okay? So Locrian, again, is weird. Locrian is kind of like another level down from minor and Phrygian. Okay? So let's look at the same scales again, but with the new solfege system. Now, if the other one works for you, that's fine. I'm going to show you both. You only have to pick one to be proficient at. Okay? Not a big deal. So here we go. So I'm giving a little bit more descriptions here. So you can see that Ionian is major and Aeolian is natural minor. Now, next to the other modes, I've given you the scale that it's closest to, and then what you have to do to change it. And then I have bolded the solfege that it changes, okay? So notice that Ionian and Aeolian are the same. But what this does is now it allows us to see the first scale degree of our modes as center pitches, not tonic, because we're not tonal anymore, but as center pitches, and it orients the entire mode around do. What this requires, however, is you to do more switching of your solfege. So for instance, for Dorian, notice that we've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do. Okay? And then for Phrygian, the lay comes back, and then now we have ra. Okay? The hardest one of these is Locrian because we have a say. We've only gotten a say before, so we go do, ra, mi, fa, say. Okay? So I'm going to go quickly through these. We'll do half steps again, but we're not going to use much time in between. Just for the sake of argument, let's go ahead and try to sing through all of these with the new solfege that you see on the screen. So this is the second way to think about it, where every mode has its own do. Okay? So, major scale again. Okay, ready? We'll do this in quarter notes. 1, 2, major scale. Okay? So Dorian, let's do half notes. Okay? So here's D. It was re before, but now we're treating this as do. So this is now do. Ready? 1, 2, half note. Okay, Phrygian, here's E. Okay, it's like me from our relative, from our Ionian. Here's E. Let's do Phrygian. 1, 2, half note. Okay, Lydian, here's F. Ready? 1, 2, half note. Okay, mixed Lydian. Okay, so this is where we started. We're now here. Okay, 1, 2, ready. Okay, natural minor is just on quarter notes. Okay, ready? 1, 2, quarter notes. Okay, and finally Locrian. Here's it's as if we're T in major. Okay. Sing do. Okay. Half notes again for Locrian. 1, 2, ready? Okay, so those are our two systems. You can pick either one if you want to keep everything kind of based on centers, based on tonic pitches, so to speak. Not exactly tonic pitches, but analog pitches. Okay, right? This way is easy because it allows you to kind of scan for central pitches, so looking for do and stuff like that, and it allows you to kind of hear things relative to what their final and center pitches are. The other way is not easier, but the other way is different in the sense that it allows you to treat all your solfege the same. You don't have to do as much adjusting, but it requires kind of really relying on your ear to not get confused by looking at what you think is major when it actually isn't. Okay, so in either system, just pick one. And I'll talk about how to practice that at the end. And if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know, okay? So before we end, let's go ahead and talk about how we name the modes and how we identify them. It is important. So modes are named for their first pitch, not for the relevant scale, okay? So if I say E Phrygian, that means that is the scale where E is in the third mode, okay? E Phrygian. Phrygian's the third mode, E, which means that E Phrygian is in the key of C major. Okay, if you say C Phrygian and you mean E Phrygian, that's not actually the case. C Phrygian implies the key of A flat. Okay, that's what's tricky. So again, modes are always named for their first note and for their relationship to major. They're not named, like if you say C Dorian does not start on D. For instance, C Dorian starts on C and is from the key of B flat. Okay, so again, this is a little bit confusing, but again, if you have any questions, just let me know. So finally, there's not that much. I mean, it's 7 things to remember. It's not that much, but if you do need a phonetic device, I've given you one here. I don't play loud music after lunch. Okay, this is useful because it tells you all of your modes in the order that they appear: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixed Lydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. What's also nice about this is that notice that there's 2 L's. There's Lydian and Locrian. Loud has a D in it, Lydian. Lunch has a C in it, Locrian, right? So if you need a phonetic device, there it is, okay? So let's talk about what you need to do in the meantime, okay? So for practicing this, really get down one solfege system, okay? I'm not going to require you to learn one or the other because, you know, I could require, but we learn differently. So pick whatever one works the best for you. Now, memorize the Greek names. That's super important because if you say the third mode this, third mode that, that gets kind of tricky for reasons I won't get into. But just learn that if you're referring to the third mode of major, it's Phrygian and so on, okay? That mnemonic device might be helpful. So practice hearing the differences. So at a keyboard or on an app on your phone, or you can buy a melodica like mine for $20. Practice hearing what the differences sound like because some of them are quite subtle. So Lydian is this wonderfully beautiful, striking phi raised to it, but most of the scale is just like major. So it's a pretty subtle. In any case, I shouldn't have put that away yet. So in any case, sing through these a lot. You can either play this video again or just on your own try to sing them. Eventually try to sing them without any sort of assistance or aid. Try to sing them just given your first pitch. Get it down. But yeah, there's a lot of subtlety here. There's not a lot theoretically happening, despite what it may seem like at times, but this is a more orally tricky thing than where we're going next, which I think is going to be more a theoretically tricky thing, okay? Also, if you really want to get your modes down, I would highly recommend practicing skips as a warm-up, for instance. So when I say skips, I mean something like this. like that kind of pattern, or like this. Right? Those kind of patterns, because they really nail your pitch alterations to get these different modes if you do that. Okay, so for instance, let's go ahead and do a Lydian skip warm-up. Again, really close to major, but that middle gets kind of wonky. And so on. So that's useful. You don't have to do it nearly as fast as I do right now. Okay, you can do it slowly. But in any case, that's a really useful way to do it. You could also do kind of Remington style things if you'd like. So. And stuff like that. That'll really help you think about these things intervallically, because the music that we'll be singing next time will not be all stepwise. So, careful. I also have some extra things. Modes can be quite fun, and I know that we have composers and aspiring jazzers in the room. So, there's extra things that you can do. These are not required at all, but you can play around with chords that imply certain modes. So we're not going to really talk about harmony. There's no harmonic dictation really to do for modes. Renaissance music is great and stuff, but we just don't have the time for that. But play around with what these different chords sound like. So think about playing like a major triad, but adding in, say, Phi. So it's like a major triad plus the raised pitch. So like, that's kind of like a Lydian inflected chord. Kind of interesting. So lots of possibility there. Or if you want, you can email me and we can set up a video chat of some kind. There's other modal systems. In fact, the modes of melodic minor are quite interesting. So if anybody's interested in that, just let me know, and I can go ahead and we can talk this stuff out. So, okay. So with that, everybody, that is the first time around on this. Let me go ahead and get my OBS back up. So, I hope that this works out for everybody. If there's any sort of glaring issues in the audio or in the video, just please let me know. I'll be posting your next one soon. So today was more of the theory, more of the background. Next time we're going to be doing a lot of singing under Rodgers and Ottman, and then you'll have a singing assignment with that. And then finally, the last one that we'll do this week will be about melodic dictation. Okay? So with that, thank you everybody, and just email me if you have any questions.